Hello and welcome to Tales from Surgeons Hall. In celebration of Women's History Month and International Women's Day, here at Surgeons Hall we would like to highlight a few of the many amazing women that appear in our history. Women were not allowed full access to study at university in the UK prior to 1877, making it almost impossible for women to gain access to many professions, including medicine. The first group of matriculated undergraduate female students in the UK began studying medicine at the University of Edinburgh in 1869. They were Matilda Chaplin, Helen Evans, Edith Petchey, Isabel Thorne, and it was figureheaded by Sophia Jex-Blake, who led the campaign for their access to university. The group were later joined by Mary Anderson and Emily Bovell and became known as the Edinburgh Seven. Despite the name, there were other women who joined their campaign during the time that they were at Edinburgh University. The class at its largest number was 10. At this point, the women were not admitted to study on the same terms as their male counterparts. The university would not accept men and women being taught together, so the women had to organise their own classes and pay up to 3 times what their male counterparts did. Despite this, their studies began with great success. The women were receiving top scores in their studies, and Edith Petchey actually scored top in her chemistry exam, which qualified her for the Hope Scholarship. However, to avoid unrest among male students, Edith was denied the Hope Scholarship and it was granted to the highest scoring male student instead, who was actually retaking the course for the second year. The unrest did not finish there, unfortunately. There were growing resentment against the women, and in 1870 an angry mob gathered at Surgeons Hall with the aim of preventing the Edinburgh Seven from sitting their anatomy exam. This plaque currently sits on the north gate of Surgeons Hall, and it commemorates the Surgeons Hall riot, as well as acknowledging the tremendous efforts of the Edinburgh Seven. And despite this riot, the women actually went on, they sat their exams and they passed and they continued with their studies. Their campaign was, however, ultimately to end in failure when Edinburgh University blocked their route to graduate. Their efforts did, however, put the rights of women to university education on the national political agenda, and legislation to ensure that women could study at university was passed in 1877. And despite their disappointment in Edinburgh, 5 of the original 7 went on to qualify from universities abroad, and Sophia Jex-Blake returned to Scotland after qualifying in Dublin to become Scotland's first female doctor. Many women also were to follow in the path of Edinburgh Seven, and in the coming years found new ways to access medical qualifications. Although women were not permitted to study medicine at Edinburgh University after the Edinburgh Seven until 1892, with the first graduating in 1896, from 1886, the Scottish Royal Medical Colleges admitted women to study and sit the triple qualification. The medical qualification had equal status with the university MD, and upon final examination, successful candidates were licensed to practice medicine and surgery. The triple qualification became a valuable pathway for many students who faced barriers to a traditional university education. This was not just women, but also minority ethnic groups, lower income students, and also later refugees fleeing Nazi Europe. Many of the college's triple qualification licentiates went on to have illustrious medical and surgical careers, and one woman who was part of the early cohort was Elsie Ingalls, who qualified with us in 1892. Although she trained initially in Edinburgh, Elsie completed her studies in Glasgow. This image is Elsie's triple qualification course schedule, a 4-page document outlining the subjects, tutors, and location of our classes and clinical experience. Throughout her career, Elsie sought to improve maternity facilities and healthcare for women, and in 1901 founded a maternity hospital in Edinburgh staffed only by women. Yet she's perhaps best remembered for establishing the Scottish Women's Hospitals for Foreign Service in 1914. She was famously told to go home and sit still by the War Office after her offer of a ready-made field hospital unit staffed by women to help Allied war efforts abroad was declined. However, the French government took Elsie up on this, and her first unit left for France in Serbia in December 1914. Around 1,500 women served with the Scottish Women's Hospital in France, Russia, Greece, Corsica, and Serbia. In 14 almost all female staffed medical units, they cared for sick and wounded soldiers, civilians, and prisoners of war in the heart of war zones, as well as providing assistance to refugees. Although the college has been happy to admit female licentiates, the first was actually in 1751 when an Anne Kerr was examined as a licentiate in midwifery. It would actually take until after the First World War for the question of admitting women as fellows to be taken seriously. In 1920, the college admitted its first female fellows. One of the first was also the first female surgeon in Scotland, Gertrude Hertzfeld, another woman more than worthy of celebrating on International Women's Day. Hertzfeld was fiercely ambitious, and she claimed to have wanted to study medicine since she was age 5. She qualified in medicine from the University of Edinburgh in 1914 after encountering significant barriers during her undergraduate years. You see, at this time, lectures for men and women were still separate, and women were not admitted on equal basis to men at university until 1916. In her third year, she decided that surgery was her real career path. And it's a bold and ambitious thing to try and do at this time, as the obstacles into a surgical career path would only heighten going into this male professional world. And this intensified when she went on to practice surgery after graduating. However, during the war, and partly because of a shortage of male students, she continued her journey into surgical practice with brief work in English hospitals. Although now able to qualify and practice medicine, women were still excluded from holding posts in most general hospitals, so this was actually a big step. Gertrude was under no illusions regarding the opportunities that had been offered to her. She's quoted in saying, "It was the First World War that gave me my chance." After the war, she returned to Edinburgh and became the first woman to be appointed house surgeon at the Royal Edinburgh Hospital of Sick Children, later becoming senior surgeon. Along with other college fellows, she was instrumental in advancing the idea that paediatric surgery could be a specialism in its own right and a full-time occupation, and not merely just an element of adult surgery. Over the years, her achievements have been highlighted in local and national press articles, and Edinburgh City Council actually currently have Gertrude Hertzfeld on their street name bank. Now, you may have already been familiar with a few of the women that I have mentioned today. A woman that you may not have heard of, but that is more than worthy of recognition, is Caroline Nonponzolo. In a letter to support her application to study for the triple qualification, the science student was introduced by the principal of a university in Fort Hare as the first native woman from South Africa to study medicine. When she left South Africa in 1938 on a journey to study medicine in Scotland, her story was such a big deal that South African press reported that before she sailed for Europe, she was met at nearly every railway station by teachers, journalists, and clergymen who wished her Godspeed. Prior to her application to the Scottish Royal Medical Colleges, Caroline had encountered barriers in attempting to secure a place at British medical schools. For example, she had applied to study at St Andrews University, yet encountered a haughty response to her application from the Scottish University's Entrance Board, which stated, "So far as my information goes, the South African Native College, Fort Hare, is not incorporated with any of the South African universities, and I suppose it to be a kind of high school. In any case, we accept no one from South Africa who has not obtained the matriculation certificate of the Joint Matriculation Board. Yet, as revealed in her documentation, Caroline had passed the Joint Matriculation examination, having already also completed a first year of a degree in South Africa. It was on this basis she turned to the Scottish Royal Medical Colleges, and although there were no class places left in that year in Edinburgh, she took the triple qualification in Glasgow and qualified in medicine in 1942.